Hello everyone, I am Noelle Rollins. Welcome to the Peaceful Palette Art Lesson Series. Today we are going to be working with a 2H pencil and an 8B pencil and an eraser. We're going to do a little section of this. I wanted to just give you the context here as I zoom in and you see just a little tiny part of it. And the whole goal of this lesson is I'm going to focus less on the sketching and more of just showing you what the power of an eraser can do. So I'm just roughly recreating this little inner corner of the eye. And basically my whole goal here is just to get the shape. It's not going to be exact. We're not focusing on making sure it's identical. But this photo reference had such great contrast between light and dark. And I thought, what a perfect opportunity to show how we can use an eraser to really get in there and show some extra detail. I also end up using a very fine tipped eraser that you'll see once I pull it out that I forgot to mention. That eraser that you'll see later is called a Tombow Mono Zero Elastomer eraser. So just a fine tipped eraser that'll just help get a little bit more detail. You can also use the eraser on the end of a pencil. That'll also give you pretty detailed area that you can help erase. So if you're following along, mainly focus on just the general shape. As you can see, I just did where the upper eyelid comes in, the lower eyelid, really rough where those tear ducts are. You can see generally where some of these highlights are and where the creases are in the lower lid. At any point during this video, you can pause and catch up. I am just using the 2H pencil right now, so if you have a regular school pencil, that also will work just fine. And I'm trying to draw pretty light. I just went on a walk in the woods and my dog is laying next to me panting, so if you hear that. My husband and son this evening are out on a overnight canoe pedal down the river. So they'll be out on the canoe till about 2 a.m., which I just think sounds amazing. So I am having an art night and they are getting to canoe down the beautiful St. Croix River. So I am going in and just really trying to somewhat show these little highlighted areas. So if you have an 8B or even a 6B drawing pencil, you can come in now. Using medium pressure, we're just going to start filling in some of the shading. And again, the whole goal here is to show the contrast and how we're worried less about having an exact drawing and more about the overall effects that I'll show with the eraser, so you can get the idea. So I am turning my hand to get the different angles, but if you are working on just a pad of drawing paper, it might be easier for you to turn your paper to get the right angle. When I know I'm going to fill in a dark area, sometimes it's easier to just circle around where I know I want to avoid, just to give me a little tiny buffer. So I'm using the side of the pencil somewhat, and light to medium pressure for the most part. And now I'm using medium to hard pressure. We're just going to fill in that tear duct area. And what I'm doing is just constantly looking back at my reference photo And just generally working to get this similar feel here. Another tool you could use right here is a charcoal pencil, and it will give you this really rich dark color and also is wonderful for erasing. So if you'd like a little bit more contrast, I couldn't suggest it highly enough to play around with the charcoal pencil. So just getting some of the color on this upper lid here. Just nice and easy. Don't let any of this be stressful. If you work at a little bit slower pace, there's no problem at all. Just pause it whenever you need to and catch up. There's no worries. You can also choose a couple other options is to draw a smaller drawing where you're covering less space. Or you can just simply follow along and watch the first time so you can see how everything lays out. So I'm just using light to medium pressure here and just really making sure to just cover this area. I'm not worrying too much about the direction of my pencil strokes. Mostly just trying not to make any really dark or obvious lines. So we'll just work to get this area covered with pencil, just to help give us a little contrast there. So this is tiny little crease there under those reflections, about halfway between the lash line and the deeper crease. So again, don't worry too much on this part about getting it exact. It's more the point. I've said this in other drawing videos here in this lesson series, but so often art is the compromise between how much detail you want to put into something and how much time you have to do that. Sometimes how much time we have to put into a portrait is our own choice. Sometimes we have a limited time schedule and we just have to be realistic about what amount of time we have. Sometimes it's simply that we're learning and it doesn't make sense to spend dozens of hours on one portrait as we learn. We just want to be able to do small little practices and build up our skill. And the reverse of that is if you have a commission for someone or you decide you're going to do a very highly detailed portrait, then this eye section alone could take hours, where you'd make sure each of these are exactly where they need to be and really spend the time shading and drawing it perfectly. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just simply what your choice is or what you have to give at that time. I have found with almost any art piece at some point, you have to make the decision to keep going and going or declare it complete. My hope here with this series is just to introduce different types of drawing mediums, different styles, everything from line drawing to shading, and then introduce the colored pencils and the advanced colored pencils really showing tips and tricks along the way in helping a wide range of people who are interested in just finding a creative outlet, or maybe they already know that they love art, a way to just kind of have some time with yourself, to slow life down and just take a moment. I also know that there's different times of my life where I needed something like this more. And now that my kids are growing up a little bit, I have a little bit more need, I would say, to just be deliberate with having creativity in my life and having an outlet that is my own, that is healthy. And drawing is such a great outlet. It helps us build patience. It really balances out so many of the other things in the world that are just faster and faster and faster. Drawing, you really have to just focus on each pencil stroke at a time. So if you're not a patient person, drawing is actually a really great skill to build, and just some time for yourself to enjoy, because it will teach you to be a little more patient and to be a little more in the moment. I've noticed for myself too, being a creative person, that when real life happens, I'm able to come up with creative solutions so often because I'm used to thinking of things creatively. And I think that that's no accident or coincidence. I think it really is just having to look at things and think outside the box sometimes. I remember years ago working at a company with my dad, and we would go into different businesses and help them with their shipping systems and automate how they ship their products and all of that fun stuff. And so often, so many of the IT people, I would find out, are musicians. And I think it's a similar thing where they spent so much of their time having to use certain skills or parts of their brain, and they needed a healthy way to unwind, to de-stress. And music is such a great way to do that. And drawing is as well. So if music is not quite your thing, maybe drawing is. I grew up with both my parents being musicians, and so it was just something that we had, where we had microphones set up all the time and amplifiers and receivers hooked up to CD players and record players and all sorts of fun things. So as a kid, I just thought that was so much fun. Me and my friends would hold concerts in the garage, often to the Beatles or Debbie Gibson or New Kids on the Block. Really fun things in the 80s. Kokomo, the Beach Boys. But as music wasn't really my thing long term, I found a lot of joy in drawing musicians and musical instruments and things like that. It's fun how life sometimes, you can look back later and see how things connect. So here what I'm doing is just constantly looking at that reference photo and just working to connect these little shadowed pores, darker shadowed ridges on the skin. And again, I'm not worrying that it's exact, but I want to generally make it obvious as to where I'm working. So we haven't done any erasing really so far. Mostly I'm just laying down the color still, or laying down the pencil still. Just really working to build up that shading. So The drawing's starting to come together. You can start to see somewhat here. I wanted to make sure to show you the entire eye at the beginning because otherwise, if you were just looking at it right now, it takes a second trying to figure out, is it a sailboat? Is it like a shark mouth? What's happening? So there's no right or wrong way for how to notice the details. If it works better for you to start at one corner and just work your way across and then work your way down, that is just fine. I'm not really sure what I do. I bounce around a lot. I try to do the things of similar shading values. It might be a habit from working with color where once I have like a red in my hand, I try to find all the things that need that red before I move on to the next color. But I'm also left-handed, so I tend to work generally from the viewer's side, the right to the left. There's no right or wrong way. It's all, as you practice, and you'll kind of discover what your preference is. In the meantime, I try to encourage you to try new things. Sometimes something might feel uncomfortable at first, and it turns out then to be your favorite way to do it. But there's nothing wrong also if you wanted to pause this video right here and draw it on your own terms, how it works for you. So here with this cotton swab, I'm just really smearing this pencil together. I'm going to the clean part of the swab, and I'm going to do this lighter part of the lid. And really just blending it out so you don't see the paper between the pencil strokes so much. Working to do somewhat in the shape of like the eye there. Now I'm using this blender. All this is doing is simply just doing a sharper edge. I have a link in the description if you're interested in a basic pencil set that comes with blenders, erasers, things like that. But anywhere from an art store to like a Walmart, Amazon, all sorts of places sell basic drawing sets or these blenders, and they're very affordable. So I'm working it, circling around these little highlights over here. And mostly just letting things blur themselves out. Very few things are left white once I'm done here. That's where eraser will come in and help us highlight those parts. So in order for the eraser to really show up and do its thing, it's nice to have the contrast built up. So I'm smearing these here in a way that's somewhat mimicking the pattern of the skin. The cotton swab advantage is it just is a lot more of an area at a time. And a lot of times it'll still hold generally the line or spot that you drew, but it'll just smear it out a little bit on the edges. But sometimes you'll have to go back in and just redefine it if you smeared it too much. But now we can start to see just a general base layer. So this is that fine eraser I was talking about. It just has a tip a little bigger than the point of a pen. And I'm going in just those obvious spots on the lower lid there. And that pencil comes right off, which is just so great. Sometimes you'll get those little eraser pieces. So here I'm just trying to make sure I don't have those off so I can be precise as possible. So with the eraser, I'm just rubbing back and forth, really in a tiny motion, just a little bit to really help pick those colors up. So now I'm just really looking back at that reference photo and deciding, okay, underneath that crease is a little tiny white line. I'm gonna go ahead and add that. Sometimes what you can do also is if the eraser you have is a little too thick, like if I was doing that line and it was a little too thick, then I could come back in with a little bit of pencil and work into that line again to thin it out. You just get creative until it's the look you want. So now here, there's all these wonderful textured skin pores, which are just fun to draw. Instead of being annoyed when something like this happens, just look at it as a way where it's a pretty easy way to add a ton of detail to your art. These little spots are what people notice later and think, wow, that was really detailed. I'm just using tiny circular strokes there to pick that up. Now, isn't that so fun? How I can just start to give those little highlights on each pore and really show that light reflecting. If you would like to see a drawing of one of the features with a charcoal pencil, let me know. You can also look back through my time-lapse art videos where I did one of my son, Aspen, in charcoal. And you can really see some of the eraser details there. I had fun doing, he's 13 and had these pores on his nose, kind of almost like blackheads and whiteheads and stuff that, as his mom, I just thought were precious and really wanted to work him up. And then he's starting to get kind of thicker peach fuzz, not quite a mustache, but so I was able to come in with the same technique here and highlight each of those little hairs on his upper lip. So we have a few minutes left here where we'll continue just adding more and more detail. But I love already how far we've come on this sketch and showing these eraser marks and just how much detail and fun it is. On these highlights where I'm working now, when I was smearing, I went and smeared into them a little bit just to add this really light shading there so that I could come in with the eraser and make them pop again, just with little touches of pure white showing through. So again, just more of these little tiny pores. So at this point, you could choose to be finished, but we're going to spend a few more minutes just really looking back through. When you look at the reference photo, there's all sorts of pores shown where the nose is starting and the under eye area is. So we're going to go through here and Just double check if there's any more detail we can be adding down there. And truthfully, it's less about being exact in, no one's going to know if your pour is a millimeter to the left or the right. It's generally having that same feel that overall matches the reference photo. Unless your goal is a hyper-realistic portrait, which is super fun, and I enjoy doing them tremendously, and I'm still learning even and pushing myself to continue to grow at doing them. But other than that, it's more implied detail and really just capturing the feel. So I went back in with the pencil and just added a little bit of darker parts there, and I'm just stepping back, taking a look at both, comparing, seeing is there anywhere I've missed, is there anything that it stands out to me when I just take the whole thing in again. And again, if we were to spend another 20 minutes, I would just keep going. I would add more lowlights in, spend more time darkening up those spots around the tear duct, making sure those shapes are exact. But generally speaking, we can get the idea here. I love these little pores on our lower lids that so many of us have that show. The light reflects off in little tiny specks. So here I'm smearing it just so that there's a little bit more contrast when I do any erasing. Otherwise, the tooth of the paper, how it was drawn, was so gritty, you couldn't really tell exactly where I was coming in and erasing versus where the tooth of the paper was showing. So now I can come in and you can see these tiny little details showing up. And again, these are my favorite, where I just, whiskers, wispy baby hairs. Some people, when you do their hairline, their hair and baby hairs reflect white. Pores, facial hair, even jewelry, earrings, rings, things like that. Really capturing gems, and the shimmer off of jewelry uses the same technique. So the combination of going in with the eraser and making those little pores, and now I'm going in with the tip of the pencil and doing the same thing by just adding a little bit now of sharper detail. It really lets the viewer know that they're looking at a highly detailed drawing, and their eye will fill in a lot of the other details when they can see some of that detail implied. Another thing to watch for is if your hand has smeared across something. Sometimes you might feel like you have things pretty complete and then your hand smears across it, and you just want to kind of go back in and take a final glance at everything, even when you think you're done. Here I'm working to just darken up underneath these highlights. Using a lot more pressure with my pencil now and just really darkening these areas up. If you're ever doing pencil like this in a very large area, cotton balls or a wadded up tissue, you can do different things like that. Sometimes you can use a paintbrush and just use that to work that pencil into the paper and smear it around. There's different tricks you can do like that when you're working in large areas. So here is a very detailed close-up of what we just completed. If you have any questions about this lesson, please ask in the comments. I will be happy to answer. In the meantime, I hope you join us for our next lessons. We're going to continue on with the features of the face, starting next with the nose. And you're also welcome to go back and watch all of the eye lessons, everything from drawing the eyes all the way up through different colored pencil styles, where I show you in real time, step by step. Here's a few other different examples where I've used eraser that I've just loved the result. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye.